want to move on to the second presenter, Johannis Aziz, who is a research fellow at the Office of Education Research at NIE. His research includes character and citizenship education, social studies education, purposeful learning, and lifelong learning. And he also teaches Singapore Studies, which is a course on Singapore society, politics, and public policy. So his talk today is on purpose and meaning for Singaporean society, the impact of the future of work on individual purpose, and the role of education. So may I now invite Johannis to speak. Johannis, over to you.
Right, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us here today. I would first like to thank OER and AST for giving me this opportunity to share with you findings of my study. And of course, I could not have successfully carried out this study without the invaluable contribution and guidance of my co-PIs, Associate Professor Mary Ann Heng, from whom you've just heard, and Associate Professor Mark Bilden, who could not be with us here today. So the title of the study, as Dr. Auri mentioned, is Purpose and Meaning for Singaporean Society, the Impact of Future of Work on Individual Purpose and the Role of Education. Now, I know that the title is a bit of a mouthful, but I hope it's already clear that there are three main points of interest here. First, purpose and meaning in life, the future of work, and the future of education. Primarily, my co-PIs and I were motivated to learn more about purpose and meaning in life and what that meant for Singaporeans, not students, but adult Singaporeans. Adult Singaporeans have already well into their working lives, or even those who have recently finished their working lives. But we also wanted to place our study in a forward-looking context and what is currently more salient right now in terms of looking forward than the globally anticipated fourth industrial revolution and the predicted disruptions on the way we live, work, and indeed on the demands that we make on our education system. And so we wanted to learn more about how the future of work and education will have an impact on how Singaporeans find purpose and meanings in their lives. But what do purpose and meaning actually mean? Right? So aren't they different things to different people, ultimately speaking? While that might be true, when people talk about, generally talking about having purpose, having meaning in life, I think we do tend to understand each other. And so for the purposes of this study, we found two broad, but I think sufficiently substantive definitions of the concepts. George and Park tell us that meaning is the extent to which one's life is experienced as making sense, as being directed and motivated by value goals, and as mattering in the world. Along similar lines, William Damon and others tell us that purpose is a stable and generalized intention to accomplish something that is at once meaningful to the self and of consequence to the world beyond the self. In both definitions, we think that last bits are key here, right? To matter in a world that lies beyond oneself. So even though we begin by looking at individual lives, ultimately meaning and purpose point towards something much larger context, right? And as for the fourth industrial revolution, it was a term coined by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. And we think by now, most people would have already heard how economists around the world are anticipating new technologies like nanotech, big data, AI, robotics, right? That they are set to disrupt not only the way we work, the way we study, but also subsequently the way we organize societies and our politics even. And so, because we were looking at some wide-ranging yet very deep concepts for this study, my co-PIs and I decided against a general survey in favor of a semi-structured interviews with open-ended questions. Right? So this is basically, especially since we wanted to learn about the life experiences of our participants as well, right? So that we have this structure so that our participants can speak at length and can speak frankly. And instead of surveying the general population, we decided to focus on 15 prominent Singaporeans from 6 societal segments: business, education, public policy, the arts, religious organizations, and the voluntary service organizations, right? And our participants are some of the leading figures in the sectors, and many are well known for their participation in thoughtful public discourse as well. So this study was basically guided by three main research questions. RQ1 is the what question. What do purpose and meaning mean for our participants, right? Coming from the various sectors that you do. RQ2, what are the prospects of finding meaning and purpose in the future of work as they understand the implications to be? And RQ3, how does all of that affect what we will need from our education system going forward? Right, so for RQ1, on the findings themselves, when it comes to RQ1, we found a broad common understanding of what purpose and meaning are. Now, a couple of our participants did talk about finding meaning in developing one's career, but by this, they didn't mean material success or compensation levels, how much you get paid, company car, corner office. Like they meant that it can be meaningful to improve oneself or one's organization, right? To bring oneself or the whole organization to a higher level of performance. And we do think there is something to this, right? As long as it doesn't devolve into antisocial behaviors, right? That it doesn't devolve into behaviors that negatively affect the rest of society. Nevertheless, even these participants agreed with most of the others that ultimately meaning usually comes from the relationships you have with other people and the life experiences that you share with other people. And most participants were driven in life by serving others, right? Notably, all three of the participants representing the business sector were also very much involved with NGOs and voluntary organizations. Just give you a second if you want to read that quote. Okay. So interestingly, while most of the participants stressed the purpose and a meaning that comes from serving others, a few also added that this orientation towards others was still beneficial for the individual in terms of developing a healthy self-esteem, a more well-rounded personal identity. Right? So ultimately, by serving others, you are also serving your own needs as a connected, as a social and moral being, right? As as an individual that's embedded in a society around them. However, almost all of our participants did not feel that the current work ethos in Singapore supports finding meaning and purpose in life, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next two sections. Right, so for RQ2, we found a broad support for the development of what we call 21CCs, 21st century competencies. Of course, that's not the term used by our participants themselves, right? But they talk about creativity, inquisitiveness, innovativeness, and human-centered skills. But I think that 21CCs is a valid shorthand to use for these purposes. Nevertheless, our participants feel that the Singaporean system in general, right, both in school and at work, has not traditionally been good at fostering 21CCs. And they take aim specifically at the meritocratic system that we have and the narrow definitions of success that it feeds into. Right? So in order to support a wider array of skills and dispositions, we need to start recognizing a wider array of pathways in life that are perfectly valid and amenable to building a successful life as well. The good news is that our study participants think that developing 21CCs in our people will not only serve the needs of the future economy, but also serve us in our search for meaning and purpose in life. Because as the list of things that AI and robots can do widens, we are left with a core activities that only human beings can do. And this, our participants feel, will bring us closer to the things we value as human beings, right? So as we leave behind some of the other things that can be done by robots, things that can be done by script, right? Then we focus on the things that make us uniquely human, and hopefully this will bring us back to our core needs and values. This is certainly a silver lining, right, to the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution. The bad news, however, it remains that that we are still going to have to deal with the uncertainty and vulnerability brought by the fourth industrial revolution itself. Right? So the future economy is not going to be as stable as we prefer or as we've been used to. Right? So most people will say that it's probably going to be the end of single career lifetimes. Right? That we're going to have to move from different career to different career, from different sectors perhaps. Nevertheless, our participants had no doubt that Singaporeans will be able to deal with these issues as they come, right? So, and the unanimity and strength of this certainty actually was quite encouraging, right, to me and my co-PIs. They had very little doubt that Singaporeans will have what will be required, right, to deal with this VUCA world, as Prof. Hing mentioned earlier. For RQ3, our participants were generally doubtful of the continued relevance of traditional school pedagogies for developing 301CCs. But again, it's not simply the teaching practices that they question, right? They believe that as long as we are relentless about pursuing economic growth, then our education system will respond to that, right, and remain instrumentalist in nature, because they will remain in service of a very narrow set of educational outcomes, right? And perhaps ironically, despite the economic success that we've had, right, our participants do not think that the exam-focused education system we have has not actually been preparing our students for the real world of work anyway, right? And so our participants suggest multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, participatory, and experiential learning as good ways to move beyond traditional teaching pedagogies. But ultimately, I think what most of them are pointing to is letting students have a bigger say or bigger ownership of what they want to learn. And this will enable them to inject that into their education, the interests and the passions that they have as individuals. But we think what is more to the point here is our participants' support for what is today being called a whole person education, right? Because this is congruent with the general theme so far, that our participants are against an education system that primarily or singularly serves economic needs to the extent that it crowds out meeting the needs of meeting our students' social and moral needs. So in a way, what the participants want to see from the education system is the development of genuinely democratic citizens. And by that, we don't mean citizens who always go out and vote, citizens who always follow the law. Right? By that, we mean citizens who gladly participate in our collective life, who take an interest in the lives of other people, who can interact well with other people because they have character and good values, and also because they have good character and good values, and also that they have a good understanding of how different people, right, in life have different beliefs, different needs, and also different, importantly, different ways to contribute, right, to society in general. So I would like to end this presentation just with a note that I think a lot of what I've said so far might not be necessarily news to us who are involved in education. Nevertheless, I think it was interesting to see what people outside of education, right, other adults, people who are successful in their own careers, but also people who are, most of them are also parents, right? Think about the education system and the direction that they want it to move into. They do recognize, in general, that some of these things that we've talked about, we are moving in that direction, but I think there is a near unanimous desire to see even more progress, right? And the education system move faster in that direction. Although, as I've mentioned in this presentation, they also see some of the social and economic milieu being obstacles, right, to having greater emphasis in this direction. And with that, I end my presentation and hand things back over to Prof. Chu.
Okay. Thank you very much, Johannis. I think, again, a lot of food for thought. Once again, building on the previous sharing by Marianne, the idea of the importance of person-oriented, the whole person-oriented education, humanistic rather than economic-centric education. I think what interested me was when you shared about 21cc. I think the emphasis on 21cc, has occurred since like 10 years ago. And when all these transnational organizations like OECD and World Economic Forum pushed for these frameworks, and critical thinking, creative thinking were very important, But I think when we think about today, right, there are other 21cc competencies that have become also very important. I think what you touched on were the kinds of soft skills, ability to relate to others, ability to dialogue, collaborate, resilience, adaptability. I think these have become more and more important given our very intensely interconnected world that we live in now. So it made me think about this idea of relationship building, how we can think about that in schooling, because a lot of times schools are packed, right? Students go from one class to another class. After class, they go for tuition, this and this. How do we build strong relationships? And not just amongst students, but the school as a community can be that ecosystem where teachers also feel part of that school community, where they also have strong relationships as well. Yeah, so these are really good questions. Given that we have spent the last hour listening to presentations, let's take a short 5-minute break, and then we'll have our last presenter talking about CCE. So let's be back here at 3:35. Do take a short break and see you soon.